Launched in 2014, the Maryland Policy Forum is a new program of the Maryland Public Policy Institute. It's an entirely unique idea in the state of Maryland. We created the forum to promote sensible, intelligent debate on public policy issues in the state. No name calling, no toxic shouting matches that dominate today's political discourse. Instead, the Policy Forum will host public events across Maryland that elevate ideas over insults, policy over partisanship, and reason over empty rhetoric to lead to a more competitive and thriving Maryland. We are really all here tonight for one reason. We care deeply about transportation policy as it relates to solving the growing traffic congestion problem in this region. And so our goal tonight with this debate, with this big issue facing the proposed Purple Line project, its future, and other transportation alternatives. The questions that will be asked will be, does it reduce road congestion? Will it achieve its projected ridership goals? Is it the most cost-effective way to spend transportation dollars? Is it environmental friendly? Are there better transportation alternatives that are not being given the due attention? And more. We'll have a civil and reasoned debate, hearing from both sides of the issue, so that our community, our families, commuters, business owners, taxpayers, and policymakers can make the informed decisions about how and what is the best way to spend transportation dollars in Maryland. We have two outstanding guests this evening who will debate this issue tonight, and they are the brightest transportation policy minds in Maryland and at the national level. So to introduce our panelists, let me now recognize our distinguished moderator, who's actually moderator B, as he told me this evening. As I'm sure you were aware, with the invitation that actually the intended moderator was Robert Thompson, as we all know, Dr. Gridlock from the Washington Post, but apparently Dr. Gridlock is in gridlock, stuck in Rhode Island because of weather. But I'm so grateful that my dear friend Blair decided to, and he was a guest actually for this evening, but I said, well, in addition to your ticket price, you're going to give an additional assignment. You're going to be the moderator. So thank you, Blair, for filling in for Thompson while he's stuck in Rhode Island. So as you know, and Blair needs no introduction in this region, lifelong resident, Blair Lee. So thank you, Blair.
Thank you. My pleasure to be the backup moderator. The Plan B moderator. Is probably appropriate that Dr. Gridlock is tied up in gridlock and can't be here for the transportation program. My job is to outline the program to you. We're going to have the two protagonists come up and give their presentations, PowerPoint. Rich is going to go first, and then Randall will go second. I'm not going to describe the Purple Line to you because if you don't already know about the Purple Line, you're in the wrong hall. The movie is next door. But speaking of movies, it is interesting that we're competing tonight with a Cary Grant movie, 1937, and its title is The Awful Truth. So you can either get The Awful Truth next door or The Awful Truth here in our transportation forum. Our program, each of the speakers is going to speak, do a PowerPoint. I'll ask one or two questions, then we'll throw it open to you, the audience. Let me first introduce Randall O'Toole. He's a visiting fellow at the Maryland Public Policy Institute, our host tonight, and also a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, a traffic engineer and traffic gridlock expert. He's written about it, he's thought about it, and tonight he will speak about it. Our other speaker tonight is Rich Parsons, someone I've known for 20 years at least. Rich has done everything you can do in Maryland politics, Maryland government, Maryland private sector. He has run the Democratic Party in Maryland. He has run the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce. He's worked for the Board of Trade, a lobbyist. He has run an engineering firm, et cetera, et cetera. And you ask, how can a man so young have done so much? And the answer is, Rich is really 104 years old. So if you guys will come up, we'll get started. Rich will go first. Each speaker will do about 15, 20 minutes. and then I'll ask some questions, and then it's your turn. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I just want to say to Randall before we start, it's a great pleasure being here with you, and I know you'll acquit your side quite well on this debate. I also want to thank Chris and everyone at the Maryland Policy Institute for having this forum. I think it is important that we talk about the facts relating to the Purple Line, and that we really come to agreement quickly on this, because there's some rather urgent deadlines that we're facing on this. Can you all hear me okay? Is that better? I can't get it any closer to me. I'll try to lean in here. Is that better? Okay. Well, I'm here really on behalf of the Suburban Maryland Transportation Alliance, which is a group formed several years ago, primarily to work on transportation funding in Maryland. But now that we've actually increased funding so that projects like this are even feasible, we now have the task of making sure that the projects that we're investing in this state, whether they be road or transit, are cost effective and the most effective set of projects we can possibly have at reducing congestion, which is our main focus, and improving the performance of our transit networks. And we're here to support the Purple Line, not only because it's good for our transportation and for a more sustainable environment, but it's also a good investment on the financial side. And I'm going to walk through that a little bit here. So it is an investment that will repay the taxpayers of this state. I want to start really by framing this issue and talking about the Purple Line for not only its transportation benefits, and those transportation benefits, by the way, go beyond just congestion. That's not the only thing that this project addresses. There are also some significant economic benefits, and the key question that we're going to try to answer tonight is this a cost-effective use of our funds? And I think the answer to that, when you actually look at how this project is being funded and the economic returns in particular, the answer to that is a resounding yes, but I'll cover that as we go. And also the final point I'm going to get into towards the end is that this is a shovel-ready project. And I referred to this briefly, but we are ready to go to construction on the Purple Line by the end of 2015, after more than 25 years of arduous process. And so we literally are on the 1 yard line and about to score here. So this is a project that is very urgent in terms of its timing. Let me talk a little bit about the transportation benefits first. And they have to do with several factors. One, increasing transit ridership and reducing transit travel times throughout this corridor. And you see before you a map that basically outlines the route of the Purple Line. I won't belabor this because I think Blair's correct. If you don't know much about the Purple Line, you're probably in the wrong room. But you see where the stations go, and you see how it follows an east-west pattern and joins the existing investment we already have in the Metro Red Line, the Green Line, the MARC system is all up on that map, and the Orange Line over at New Carrollton. And this provides that east-west connectivity that our current system just doesn't have. And so that's one of the key things we're going to cover here. I want to dig in a little bit more. There's a lot of discussion. I'm sure you'll hear a lot tonight about the ridership projections and the time savings. And so the ridership forecasts for the Purple Line show about 69,000 riders per day will be using the Purple Line by 2040. Some of those riders are diverted out of cars. Others are coming, are new transit trips that the Purple Line will be generating. And others are diverted from existing bus routes that are in this corridor but don't provide a very good level of service. So the travel time savings, you'll see some of them, for example, from Bethesda to Silver Spring, 39 minutes currently by Metro. That goes down to 9 minutes on the Purple Line. That's a very significant savings between two of the key job centers in this corridor. From Bethesda to College Park, it's 48 minutes by the Metro, but that doesn't get you to College Park campus. The station right now on the Green Line is about 8 minutes away. So if you add that 8 minutes, it's a 56-minute trip to actually get to the University of Maryland. On the Purple Line, it's 39 minutes, a 17-minute savings. These are pretty significant. And what you find when you look at the ridership data on the Purple Line, if you look at the end-to-end travel times, they're not all that impressive because there's 21 stations on this 16-mile route, and the travel times from end to end are pretty significant. But if you actually look at the data, a very small portion of Purple Line riders are going to be riding the whole thing. The vast majority are making these other trips from Bethesda to Silver Spring, from Silver Spring to College Park, from Rockville to College Park, from Wheaton to Bethesda. There's all kinds of trips that come out of the modeling, and most of them are not going the entire distance, and most of them are seeing significant travel time savings. So this is definitely, from a ridership standpoint, it is achieving the goals that are enunciated for this project in the purpose and need statement. Let's talk about congestion relief a little bit. Let me see if I got the right slide here. Yeah, there's about 17,000 cars per day that will be diverted off crowded local roads when the Purple Line is open. This improves access to jobs and housing in the corridor. It also provides an alternative for people who are sitting there stuck on the Beltway. That really, the latter is kind of the biggest impact it's going to have on the Beltway. It's going to give you an alternative to sitting on it. There is some reduction in traffic volumes in the intersections, which I want to just cover briefly. This chart here is from the environmental impact statement on the Purple Line, and it really kind of digs in and shows you there are about 22, let's see, is that right? There's 22 intersections that are projected to be at or above capacity by 2040. The Purple Line actually improves performance of 13 of those intersections by at least a full letter grade in level of service. For those who are not transportation geeks, level of service is basically the volume to capacity ratio measure of the performance of the intersection. Where red on this chart, you probably can't read the numbers or the letters, but red is bad, okay? Red is fail. And you'll see the first two columns are the 2040 projections for all of these failing intersections without the Purple Line. The first being the AM rush hour, the second being the PM rush hour. The second two columns are those same AM and PM rush hours with the Purple Line in place in 2040. And you'll see there's still some congestion, but a lot less red. And that's really the point. It is a pretty significant improvement in the congestion performance at all of these intersections. The next thing I think is even more dramatic, and this is really, I think, where the Purple Line shines. There are some unique regional connectivity benefits, network connectivity benefits that come when you join these ends of the red line, when you join the red line to the green line, when you join the green line to the orange line. This isn't, you get basically a multiplier effect on the transit ridership. It's not just about connecting the stationaries along the Purple Line. And just by way of example, imagine if you're working in Rockville, which is where I live, and you want to take an evening course at our flagship university at College Park. Right now, your options are sit for over an hour in Beltway traffic. Well, first sit in 270 traffic, and then sit in Beltway traffic and blow an hour and a half each way of totally unproductive time, which basically means you're not going to take that opportunity. Or with the Purple Line, I could hop on the metro at Rockville, take it a couple stations down to Bethesda, and ride on the Purple Line straight over to College Park, get off and take that class. The whole time I'm on this train, I could be doing my homework on a laptop and actually using the time productively. This is the kind of empowerment and unlocking of potential that this kind of regional and network connectivity provides. Imagine Silver Spring, which is where we are here tonight. Between the American Film Institute, Discovery Communications, there are dozens and even hundreds of spin-offs in the communications industry, sound studios and everything. This is one of the hubs of documentary film production in the world that we're standing in right here. And think about how much more successful we could be in terms of economic development, of luring companies here in that industry cluster. If we could say, hey, you could leave your office in Silver Spring, hop on the Purple Line over to New Carrollton and be in New York on the Acela or whatever comes after the Acela if we ever get high-speed rail up to New York. You could be walking out of Penn Station 3.5 hours later without touching your car, without dealing with I-95. That's a powerful economic benefit for this community that comes from this kind of connectivity between the metro system, which we've already invested billions in, and this new relatively modest investment that we're talking about in the Purple Line. And finally, on the transportation side, I want to put this in a regional context. This is a chart that's produced by the Transportation Planning Board, which is part of the Washington Metropolitan Council of Governments, looking at our entire Constrained Long-Range Plan, the CLRP, which this is the 2014 version of it. It looks out to 2040, and it basically puts through a very sophisticated traffic model every single facility that's in our long-range plans for the region. It forecasts out population and job growth for that period, and it figures out several things. And the news isn't good, folks. Okay, what we're forecasting is about a 63% increase in the percentage of congested lane miles in this region. And that's if every single project in our Constrained Long-Range Plan is built. Okay, let me let that sink in. If we build every single project in our Constrained Long-Range Plan, which is something this region has never done, we've never built everything in our plan. But even if we did, congestion gets worse by 63%. So it seems to me, if we're talking about evaluating the PERP line, which is part of this plan. And we know that even with everything in this plan, congestion is still going to get a lot worse. And the purple line does contribute to improving congestion levels at these intersections. And it does provide capacity, and it does divert cars off the highway. If you take it out of this plan, you're going to make congestion that much worse, and you're going to create more need. There are lots of other things we have to do that need to be added to this plan, frankly. But taking anything away is really not an option in my mind. So on the transportation side, I think there's a good case to be made for the purple line for these and other reasons. But for the economics, I think it's even more persuasive. And there's really four main areas when you look at the economic benefits. There's productivity improvements, there's job creation, there's economic development benefits and revitalization of communities along the line. There are state and local tax revenue expansion and growth opportunities here. And then finally, there's an overall impact on our regional competitiveness. And I'm going to cover each of those briefly in a moment. First, on the productivity and job creation. The immediate impact of the purple line is going to be pretty dramatic. And again, that will start, if things stay on track, at the end of this year. We're going to have 3,600 new construction jobs generated by this project, and nearly 160 million in additional income generated just in Montgomery and Prince George's County from those new construction jobs. And that's just the construction jobs. There's also an additional 27,000 permanent jobs that will be created in this region as a direct result of our investment in the purple line. That translates to 1.5 billion a year in economic growth for this region, and that translates to about an average of $1,400 per household in per capita household incomes that will be boosted by this project and the spin-off investment. Total, it adds $5.6 billion to the gross regional product of this region. And this is all from an economic study that the State Department of Transportation commissioned by a group called TEMS, which is the Transportation Economics and Management Services. These are about 5 years old and are in the process of being updated. But you can see, we can quibble with exactly what their factors were that they looked at, but the bottom line is when you invest $2.5 billion in a transportation project, you're going to generate somewhere between 3.5 and 5 times that much in new economic activity. And that holds true really across the board. There have been many communities that have had similar results from projects like this. The second area I want to touch on has to do with the sustainable economic development results and redevelopment of communities that you're going to see as a result of this investment. There's already over 200,000 jobs directly in the corridor and 500,000 residents. And many times more that if you look at the rest of the network that the purple line connects to up and down the red line and the orange line and the green line. And you're going to have redevelopment around several of these stations that is already happening. And there are hundreds of millions of dollars being invested by the private sector in some of these projects. There's at least 31 of them underway right now, all of which I think will help move forward the smart growth objectives and some of the transit-oriented design that we're trying to get in these inside the Beltway communities. And this is a map that just gives you a flavor of the absolute scale and scope of these investments that are happening. And most of this would not be happening were it not for the purple line. Now, the private sector is stepping up in a very big way and betting on this project happening. And so discussion now at this 11th hour of pulling the plug is going to have a pretty disastrous effect on some of these investors. And some of these projects are actually really going to help revitalize the communities that we're talking about. So next, I want to talk about state and local tax base and revenue growth. Because when you talk about cost effectiveness, which we're going to get to in a few minutes, this is really, to me, the open and shut case for the purple line right here. We're going to be investing about 300 to 500 million of state dollars in the purple line. And the private sector is going to be leveraging, that's going to leverage investment by the private sector and the federal government of up to 1.8 billion. So a state investment of relatively modest size is going to leverage up to 900 in federal spending and up to 900 million in private sector, public-private partnership funds that wouldn't be there if we canceled this project. So it's not a case that we can find some other use for this money that's more cost-effective. No, this money just goes away if we don't build the purple line. So it's extremely effective in terms of leveraging outside investment that might go to Iowa or California or Arizona for all we know, but it won't be spent here. So that's a very critical aspect, is it's going to leverage that additional outside money. It's also going to increase property values in the corridor by $8.4 billion and $9.8 billion for the entire region, and that's over a 30-year period. So remember, we're investing $300 to $500 million at the state level, and we're boosting property values for the whole region by almost $10 billion. In addition to that, we're also boosting state, local, and federal income tax base by about almost the same amount, $9.6 billion annually. Okay, so that is a huge increase in the tax base and will allow us to do something that a lot of us from the business community have wanted for a long time, which is let's stop talking about raising taxes in Maryland, let's grow the tax base, which is something I think a lot of people can agree with. The Purple Line does that, and I think that's a very important argument this administration needs to look at. Finally, I want to talk about regional competitiveness. You know, there are some key clusters we're trying to attract here in Montgomery County as we grow our economy: bioscience, bioinformatics, healthcare, cybersecurity, IT. There's a whole bunch of different related sectors throughout, or centers throughout our region, at NIH, near White Oak, near Silver Spring, in College Park. There's great centers to help build those kind of clusters and help people collaborate better. But we have serious barriers in this region because of the woeful state of our transportation network. Purple Line connects a lot of these centers together, a lot of the federal research sites that are located in these areas, and really will help kind of engender a greater level of economic competitiveness for our region. So now we get to the real rub here of this debate. Is this a cost-effective use of funds? Let me start with a couple things. FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, rates the Purple Line right at the top in terms of cost effectiveness among all the new starts projects in the country. For our $2.4 billion investment, we get a $10 billion direct return to the taxpayers in those tax revenues that I cited earlier, the income tax base expansion and the revenues that come from that. Over the first 30 years, we were operating at a 5-fold profit. Not bad, huh? The next point here is for $300 to $500 million, which is all of that $2.4 billion that the state is actually going to be asked to come up with. We're leveraging that $1.8 billion in federal and private funds that will go elsewhere if we don't use it for this specific project. So to me, not only is this a cost-effective use of funds in the abstract, it is by far the most cost-effective use of these particular funds. Because if we don't go forward with this project, we're basically taking $1.8 billion and kissing it goodbye. So to me, using it and leveraging it for these economic benefits is an extremely good investment for the taxpayers. So, and the final point on cost effectiveness is, say we decide to kill the Purple Line and put the money into something else. You know, there's been a study to widen the Beltway for the last 20 years. It hasn't gone anywhere, but it's been studied. And it's probably something that will happen if you look 20 or 30, 40 years down the road, and it will relieve congestion. We know this because we've studied it. But if you look at those traffic models 20 or 30 years down the road, even with that, you still have a major congestion problem, and you're still going to need the Purple Line. And we're going to be right back here 10 years from now with this project back on the map, because guess what? Widening the Beltway doesn't give you the network connectivity benefits of the Purple Line. Widening the Beltway doesn't serve communities inside the Beltway. Widening the Beltway doesn't unclog those intersections inside the Beltway where there is no right of way to do a road improvement. Okay, there are unique benefits to this project, and guess what? 10 years from now, we're going to be right back here saying, you know what, we have to do the Purple Line anyway. But the problem is, every year you delay a project like this, add $100 million to the cost. 10 years of delay, we are flushing another $1 billion down the you-know-what, okay? And that is not responsible. It's not a good use of taxpayer money, and it is certainly not cost-effective. So I would argue strongly that this is the time. This is a shovel-ready project. Purple Line is ready to go to construction this year. It's been through the process for 20-some years, and boy, Montgomery County knows process. We're here at the finish line. It's kind of like my favorite Super Bowl, the best Super Bowl of all time. We are the Seattle Seahawks here, okay? We're on the 1-yard line. All we have to do is hand the ball off to Marshawn Lynch and pound the ball in. They had 2 chances, right? But what do? They drop back and they throw an interception and blow the game and go down in history as the biggest fail, as my kids would say, the biggest epic fail in Super Bowl history. All right? Now, I happen to be a big Patriots fan, so I was very happy. But we don't want to be pulling a Seattle here. We are at the 1-yard line on this project. And the most cost-effective thing we can do with this funding right now is punch this ball over the goal line and get the Purple Line built and get the economy going again and get these multiplier effects moving and the construction jobs putting money into our economy. And then let's look at everything else we need to do. But this project's ready to go. All those everything else's are not anywhere near ready to go. Let's get the purple line done now. Time for the purple line is yesterday, so let's get going. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rich. Randall, it's your turn.
Well, thank you, Rich. I don't want to say anything directly against anything you said, but I've looked at light rail lines for 20 years now, and I think the name light rail should be changed to lie rail, because when instead of looking at people's projections of everything light rail is going to do, when you look at what light rail actually has done, it turns out it accomplishes none of the things that it's supposed to do. Even the name light rail is a lie. You think it means it's lightweight? Well, you're wrong. Light rail cars are actually heavier than heavy rail cars. The Washington subway uses a heavy rail system, but those cars weigh less than light rail cars. So where does the word light rail come from? It turns out it means light capacity rail. When you hear somebody say, I'm for high capacity light rail transit, they mean they're for high capacity, low capacity transit. Light rail is low capacity transit. That's why it's obsolete. That's why it isn't needed. The reason it's low capacity is that a light rail train may be able to hold a lot more people than a bus, but for safety reasons, you can only run about 20 trains an hour, which means if those trains are crammed full of people, you can move about 9,000 people an hour, most of them standing. Now compare that against buses in my former hometown of Portland, Oregon. Portland has a bus route that can move 160 buses an hour down city streets. And with 40 seats on a bus and room for 25 people standing, you can move over 10,000 people an hour. More people than on a light rail line, just with ordinary buses on ordinary city streets. You want more capacity? You increase the size of your buses. Double-decker buses double your capacity. Double-decker buses can move twice as many people as a light rail line can move. That's why light rail is low-capacity transit, and it's very expensive transit for that low capacity. Now, when I'm talking about buses, I don't mean you need to build exclusive bus lanes for the buses. Los Angeles built some exclusive bus lanes for buses at $20 million a mile, and they run one bus at rush hour every 8 minutes, which means the lanes are empty 99.8% of the time. That's a total and complete waste, just like light rail is a total and complete waste. You don't need to do that. Now, the buses around here turn out to be some of the emptiest buses of any major city in the country. Buses in Los Angeles carry, on the average, almost twice as many people as buses in the Washington metropolitan area. The average Los Angeles bus has 20.4 people. The average Washington bus has 10.4 people. And so you have buses that are running around empty, and they're saying, oh, we need to build trains. Well, if you can't fill your buses, why do you need trains? Buses can carry more people than trains, but you're not even filling them up, so why do you need trains? Now, the problem with rail is that it's extremely costly. I don't think people understand how much $1 billion is, but if you take a pile of $1,001 bills, it adds up to be about 6 inches high. A pile of $1 billion $1 bills ends up being about 60 miles high. It's an incredible amount of money. Most of the projections that Rich was citing to you were based on an assessment that was done when they thought the purple line is going to cost $1.7 billion. The cost has already increased by 43% from that. Now they're saying it's going to cost almost $2.5 billion, and they haven't even broken ground yet. Since they've broken ground on the Honolulu Rail project, the cost on that one is increased by $900 million. So you can expect further cost increases on the purple line. So all the projections they're making about cost efficiency and so on, based on the old numbers, are already known to be wrong. Now, just for comparison, The Purple Line is going to cost more than $150 million per mile. A typical urban freeway lane costs about $4 or $5 million a mile for a lane of freeway. Honolulu built one of the most expensive urban freeways in the country. It's called the H3. It cost, in today's dollars, $28 million a lane mile. Probably the most expensive highway project in the world has been the Boston Big Dig, which in today's dollars cost $100 million a mile. So the Purple Line is going to cost 50% more than that, and there's no light rail line in the country that carries as many people as a lane mile of freeway. Most of them carry a lot less than half. There's only one that carries more than half of a lane mile of freeway. So you're spending more and you're getting less. Not only that, there are hidden costs. Not only do you have to build it in the first place, you have to keep maintaining it. About every 30 years, it has to be completely rebuilt. In 2010, the Federal Transit Administration said that America's rail systems right at that time had a $60 billion maintenance backlog, and it was getting worse every year because transit agencies were spending less than was necessary even to keep them in their current state of poor repair. For example, Boston needs to spend $450 million a year to keep it at its current state of poor repair, and they're spending less than $100 million a year. Maintenance issues are the reason why a woman died from smoke in the tunnels in January. They're the reason why this collision killed 9 people in 2009. The Washington Metro system has a $10 billion maintenance backlog. You shouldn't be building more rail when you can't afford to maintain what you've got. Now, ridership. According to the environmental impact statement, the Purple Line is going to carry 65,000 riders per day, per weekday, in 2030. That's an incredibly high number for light rail, as I'll show you in a minute. Not even the Federal Transit Administration believes it, but Maryland has gotten their projections wrong on almost every rail project they've built. On average, they've been about double what ridership actually turned out to be. All the rail projects built by Maryland have been in Baltimore, and they all way overestimated ridership. The Federal Transit Administration right now is saying it's going to carry 55,000 people per day in 2035. That's 5 extra years of ridership growth, and they're not going to make what the EIS said was going to happen in 2030. On the average, light rail lines in this country carry about 23,000 riders a day. So they're projecting 3 times the ridership, and most light rail lines in the country terminate in a downtown that has lots and lots of jobs. You don't see that here. A lot of the more successful ones go through very dense areas. You don't see that here. For example, the Hudson-Bergen light rail line in New Jersey goes through an area that's almost 4 times as dense as Montgomery County and has 50% more jobs within walking distance of the light rail line than is in all of Montgomery County. And yet the Hudson-Bergen light rail line only carries 43,000 people a day. So how is the Purple Line going to carry 65,000? Those numbers are just pie in the sky. Even if it did carry 65,000 people a day, the environmental impact statement admits that most of them would otherwise be riding buses. You're only going to get a few of those people out of their cars. And if you count the people who you're getting out of their cars, if you count the number of round trips per day, it would be cheaper to give every single person who's getting out of their car and taking a daily round trip on the light rail, be cheaper to give them a new Toyota Prius. And then 3 years later, give them a new Toyota Prius. And then 3 years later, give them a new Toyota Prius for 30 years. Be cheaper to give them a new Toyota Prius every 3 years for 30 years than to build the Purple Line. That's how expensive this line is and how few people are going to use it. Another lie, they often call light rail rapid transit. Rapid, like 15.5 miles an hour. That's how fast the Purple Line is going to go. It's actually going to go slower than 15.5 miles an hour, and that's their optimistic projection. This is actually a picture of the Green Line in Minneapolis. It was optimistically projected to go 17.5 miles an hour. It's actually going 12.5 miles an hour. But even 15.5 miles per hour, if they meet that, well, I'll tell you this much, I can bicycle from New Carrollton to Bethesda faster than that, and I'm 62 years old. So I don't think 15.5 is going to be all that amazing or attract all that many people. What about congestion relief? According to the traffic analysis done for the environmental impact statement, if you don't build the purple line, in 23, average traffic speeds are going to be 2030, average traffic speeds will be 24.5 miles an hour. If you do build it, they'll be 24.4 miles an hour. Now, a tenth of a mile an hour doesn't sound like a lot, but when you multiply it times all the traffic in the region, that adds up to 36,000 hours of wasted time a day because of people having to stop and wait for trains crossing streets, because of trains occupying rights of way that otherwise could be open to automobiles. You're wasting a lot of people's time. Now, Rich showed you a chart that showed you what's going to happen at intersections if you build the purple line. I read that document too. It said we have the no-build alternative where we do nothing, and we have the build alternative where we build the purple line and do a bunch of mitigation measures at all these intersections. It was the mitigation measures that led to the improvements in traffic congestion at those intersections, not the purple line. Why don't you just do the mitigation measures and leave out the purple line? What about the environment? Is the purple line good for the environment? According to the draft environmental impact statement, the purple line is going to use 155 million BTUs per day more than all the cars taken off the road, than is saved by all the cars taken off the road. The final environmental impact statement came up to a different conclusion, but they made two key mistakes in calculating energy consumption. First of all, they assumed that cars of the future will be just as energy wasteful as cars today, when we know that's not true because the EPA requirements are that they become more fuel efficient. And second, they forgot that when you calculate electricity consumption, you have to calculate the BTUs of the coal you're burning, not the BTUs that are delivered to the railhead, because you lose 2/3 of the energy between the power plant and the railhead in generation and transmission. And they forgot to take that into account. When you take those two things into account, the purple line wastes energy both during construction and during operation. If you want to save energy, well, give people those Toyota Priuses, or better yet, a hybrid diesel electric car. This is a plug-in diesel. It's available in Europe. It gets about 60 miles to the gallon. Not yet sold in America, but it will do far better at saving energy and reducing greenhouse gas emissions than building purple lines all over the place. Then there's the claim that light rail stimulates economic development, and you get all these multiplier effects. Well, it's nice to sit down and look at people's projections, but I want to see what actually happened. Portland built a light rail line in 1986. They zoned everything along the line for new economic development. 10 years later, this is what they got. Nothing. Nada. They got no new development. This is Mike Saba. He's a Portland planner. He's talking to the city council 10 years after the light rail line was built. He says, we have not gotten any new development that we wanted along this line. A city councilor, who happens to be mayor now, said, gee, we're in this hot market, and yet the market isn't developing this. We have to do something about it. So what did they do? They subsidized it. They've given so far $1.4 billion in subsidies to developers to develop along the light rail and streetcar lines. All of Portland's subsidies now are oriented to developing along the light rail and streetcar lines. So when they say we built the light rail line and we got all this development, they mean we spent $1 billion building the light rail line, then we spent $1 billion subsidizing development, and then we got the development. Now, Portland is often described as a shining example of a transit success story. Well, this is how successful transit is in Portland. Between 2008, in other words, the recession, the beginning of the financial crisis, and 2013, Portland gained 21,500 new jobs. How did they get to work? Well, 10,000 of them drove to work, 7,000 of them work at home, 4,000 of them take a taxi or use some other mode of transit, about 3,000 walk or bicycle, and transit lost 1,000 transit riders. 1,000 people who were formerly taking transit are now going by one of these other modes. That's how successful transit is in Portland, because they built a lot of light rail and streetcar lines. It simply doesn't work. Now you notice what has grown a lot is walking and bicycling. So it might be more important, if you want to emulate Portland's success, to protect walking and bike paths than it would be to build light rail. Now back to this question. Does light rail lead to economic development? The Federal Transit Administration actually asked 2 rail advocates, Robert Cervero, who's I think coined the term transit-oriented development. He's a planner at the University of California at Berkeley, and Samuel Seskin, who works for Parsons Brinkerhoff. And they asked them, what does transit do to economic development? And this is what they said. They said, it's a zero-sum game. Yes, if you build a rail line, you might get a little more development along the rail line, but that's development that would have taken place somewhere else in your city or county, but it's just been moved. So the property owner here wins and some other property owner loses. It's not a positive sum game like Rich was telling you. In fact, I don't even think it's a zero-sum game. I think it's a negative sum game. If you look at the growth rates of urban areas that have spent a lot of money on rail transit, you can see they're all in the low end of growth. The fastest growing urban areas are the urban areas that have spent the least on transit. So what that says is spending less on transit doesn't, spending less on transit doesn't guarantee you're going to be a fast growing urban area, but spending more on transit practically guarantees that it's going to slow down your growth because it's going to increase your tax burden. Now, I'm not the only one to be nuts enough to think up these ideas. This happens to be Peter Rogoff, who President Obama appointed to be the administrator of the Federal Transit Administration. He's now an Assistant Secretary of Transportation. But at this time, in 2010, he had been administrator of the FTA for a year, and he gave a speech in Boston. And he said, now I'm not an economist, but I've discovered an economic principle. Paint is cheap. Trains are very expensive. Take a bus, paint it a special color, and call it a special bus. And you'll get as many new transit riders as if you build a train. He said, now, buses might not be the appropriate solution everywhere, but they're certainly appropriate in a lot of places that aren't considering them. Now, this is a bus in Boulder, Colorado. It's called the Hop. They've painted a lot of their buses in distinctive color schemes. The Hop is one, the Skip is another, the Jump is another. They've all got distinctive schemes, so you just can see at a glance where your bus is going by looking at the color scheme. This is Kansas City. They've built some bus rapid transit lines. They mostly use shared streets. They haven't dedicated a lot of lanes to the bus rapid transit. They've got 50% increases in ridership when they converted from regular buses to bus rapid transit. Las Vegas, Seattle, San Francisco are experimenting with double-decker buses. Las Vegas, without building a single mile of rail, is the only urban area in the country that has doubled the percentage of people who take transit to work since 1990. The places that have built rail have mostly lost transit market share. So in the short run, look at buses. Buses are going to be your solution, not light rail. They're going to be your transportation solution. They're going to be your development solution because they're going to reduce tax burdens, not increase them. In the long run, we're going to have a different kind of transportation. Self-driving cars. I'm sure you've seen pictures of the Google car, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Volkswagen, a bunch of other companies are experimenting with these cars. By 2020, you'll be able to buy a car that will be able to drive itself most places. By 2030, you'll be able to buy cars that won't even have steering wheels or gas or accelerator pedals, just push buttons. And by 2025, before this project is even close to half of its lifespan, you'll be able to go to an app on your smartphone, call up a smart car to come and pick you up, take you where you want to go, and drop you off at your door so you don't have to walk through the ice or snow to get to where you want to go. And when that happens, why is anybody going to take an expensive light rail train? It doesn't make sense. Transportation improves economic development only when it's faster, cheaper, safer, and more convenient than the transportation it replaces. Light rail is slower, more expensive, more dangerous, and less convenient than the transportation it replaces. So I encourage you to read the report that was passed out. I hope people have some questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Randall. Let me ask each speaker one question, then it'll be your turn. Let me start with Randall. What do you say, Randall, to the real world possibility that not only the purple line that we're talking about tonight, but its Siamese twin, the red line in Baltimore, which is on the same track, no pun intended, if we walk away from $900 million of federal money for both the red line and the purple line, wouldn't that be a strategic mistake?
Well, it's not just $900 in federal money. Rich said that local money is $300 to $500 million, and then the private money is going to make up the difference. Well, why are private people going to put up money? Somebody's going to have to pay them back because this is not going to pay off the private investors any money. Who's going to have to pay them back?
The increase in their property values will pay them back.
Well, that's what you say. I don't think
That's
there's
what
going to
they
be
say.
any increase in property
It's
value.
their money and they're betting it, so you better bet they're right.
I don't think that's going to happen. Maryland taxpayers are going to end up having to pay them back. There's just no way that that's going to pay off. So, and then when the lines are 30 years old, you're going to have to pay that $2 billion again, replacing everything, just like the Washington Metro is now having to find somewhere $10 billion to replace the Metro line. So this is an enormous money pit that's going to cost Maryland taxpayers for decades until somebody finally gets the bright idea that maybe we should scrap this thing and replace it with buses. In the short run, that $1 billion from the federal government should not be enticing to you because it means far more cost that you're going to have to pay yourself.
And Rich, I think it's fair to say that Governor Hogan is not a strong proponent of either light rail program. He has delayed making a decision until May, which also happens to be when all the Democratic lawmakers have gone home. Once the session in Annapolis is over, which is probably not just a coincidence, but if Governor Hogan does kill both projects, it appears that Ike Leggett, our county executive, is proposing an independent transportation authority which would try and build it locally with Montgomery County taxpayers?
No, the Independent Transportation Authority was really for something Randall and I might both disparage, but there's a more unproven proposal out there to build a countywide BRT network. It is really at its early stages. It's just not ready to be evaluated as a ready to go project. It's not anywhere near along the same amount of study that's been done with the Purple Line. That's what that was to fund. It had nothing to do with the Purple Line. But there's a couple of things that I really need to respond to for your question. I think what Governor Hogan's going to be looking at is not the overall benefits and costs of light rail projects in other jurisdictions that have nothing to do with ours. I think he's going to be looking at the facts of this case. And Randall's great and really knows his stuff about light rail nationally. But we're here in this market, and this market has some things that are remarkably different than some of the markets he just stated. And there's a couple obvious things that I wanted to come back to regarding his presentation. One about general observations kind of globally that don't really apply in this market. For example, low capacity of light rail. Well, not when you have it on a dedicated line. A lot of low capacity and safety issues that he mentioned are much more prevalent when you've got a line that's running exclusively in traffic lanes. A good part of the Purple Line actually has a dedicated right-of-way, so that's not as much of an issue. But one of the reasons why the cost figures are different and why this region's different is you can look at other markets and say, well, buses might be more appropriate because they've got road capacity to run the buses. This region has gone 30 years without investing in our road capacity or much of our transit capacity. We don't have the capacity. We have crippling congestion that makes bus transit particularly cumbersome and time-consuming because they're stuck in the nation's worst congestion, and there is no capacity to run more buses in the Purple Line corridor. So you're raising an option that might be relevant in some other market, but it's not relevant to this particular corridor, and it's not relevant to the Purple Line. And in fact, it has been studied and rejected in this EIS process. And finally, it's kind of a cute false comparison to look at the Prius story, but you're only counting the number of cars in that analysis that came out of vehicle traffic. You didn't count the 28,000 new transit trips. I think when you add in there, your math won't add up on the Prius story. And finally, the zero-sum game of economic development. This region has a pretty good track record. If you look at what has happened economically, and there have been lots of studies done in our region, and this may not apply everywhere else, but in our region, the investment around metro stations has well paid for the investment we made in that metro system over the decades past. And every indication from all of the development projects I just showed you, you can talk theory all you want. The bottom line is the private sector is already investing in these stations. So in a vacuum, you can say that, but the reality is we're getting more investment where we want it to be. And it's not that it's a zero-sum game and there's no benefit to having development in one place as opposed to somewhere else. We have regional and local master plans where we're trying actively to concentrate development around transit hubs so that we can minimize the percentages of future trips that are having to be on automobiles all the time. We're trying to carry out our smart growth policies in this state and this county. And so having them in one place or another is not a value-free decision. There's a value to having it concentrated around transit centers. That makes better, more walkable, more vibrant communities, and it's better for us overall from a transportation standpoint. It makes it more manageable to connect these centers together. And whether we have cars of the future that drive themselves or whatever else, if you look at the projections, we don't have the capacity in this region to handle more cars of any kind unless we build it, and methods like this, the Purple Line, that get people out of their cars. We need to do all of the above. We keep getting presented with false choices about this or something else when the answer is we've got to do both. And that's the final point I want to leave.
Thank you, Rich. Now it's your turn. Please raise your hand. I'll recognize you. Direct your question to either speaker or both. Who wants to ask the first question? All the way back in the back row.
Going to have more buses, if we're going to have other Priuses or self-driving cars, et cetera, where does that capacity come from? What's your idea for how we get from Silver Spring to Bethesda? Because ultimately, there's only so many roads there right now, and it's already a very high land value, very crowded area.
Well, the interesting thing is technology is taking care of the capacity problem. Self-driving cars probably are going to triple, if not quadruple, roadway capacities. Even before self-driving cars, you can buy a car today for $25,000 that has what's called adaptive cruise control. Adaptive cruise control probably will increase capacities, roadway capacities, by 40 to 50%. And more cars are getting adaptive cruise control. When as few as 25% of cars on the road have adaptive cruise control, a lot of what we consider congestion today is going to go away. So capacity is not the issue. The issue is, where do we spend our money? Do we spend our money on an obsolete technology that didn't really make sense anytime after World War II, much less anytime in the 1980s or more recently? It didn't make sense when they built the first light rail line in San Diego for $10 million a mile. How does it make sense today to spend $150 million a mile on a light rail line that has no more capacity and is actually slower than that first line in San Diego, 15.5 miles an hour? It's not fast. You're talking about an outdated technology. And Rich said, but we're a unique region. Well, everybody thinks they're unique. Nobody's that unique. Norfolk thought they were unique. They built a light rail line, and they got a lot fewer riders than they expected. They've got no economic development along the line.
Nobody is in a region of 5.5 million people that has built as few lane miles per capita as the Washington region has built. Nobody has a situation like we have in this region, where if you put all those people in those nice fancy driving cars, you're going to be stuck in, and I'll give you absolute numbers here. We have an American Legion bridge in this region that its maximum design capacity is 175,000 cars a day. You know what it's carrying today? 210,000. It's projected to be over 300,000 by 2030. Your cars that are supposedly, in theory, and in other markets where there is excess highway capacity somewhere in their network, are very different than here in the Washington market, where there is no excess capacity anywhere in our network. So those cars that could theoretically in other markets perhaps improve capacity are going to be stuck in that same crippling congestion. They're going to be going 5 miles an hour along with everyone else. And it's not going to increase the capacity. When highway speeds get that low, the capacity of the lanes actually drops. So yeah, in theory, I don't have any problems, Randall, with what you said, but I think in this market, we've got some unique challenges. And one of those unique challenges is we've gone 30 years where we've had 40% increases in employment and 30% increases in population per decade, and we've built 10% of our highway and transit network's capacity. That gap is crippling us now and limiting our options. And I think the questioner pointed out correctly, in this specific corridor that we're talking about here, there is no capacity for significant road improvements. There is no land, there is no right-of-way. It's not an option. So why are we talking about it? We have a light rail option that's ready to go, that we know does good things to reduce congestion. We know it has an economic benefit. We know similar investments in transit in this market have paid off in the past with massive economic development success stories at most of the metro stations around this area. So, I think a lot of what you said, again, may apply in other places, but I think the Washington market has a record it can stand on when it comes to transit investment and some unique characteristics to this specific corridor that make the Purple Line a very good deal regardless.
But you're confusing high-capacity rail with low-capacity rail when you compare it with the Washington metro system. New York is
I'm
a
comparing it
city,
to
is an
two
urban
other
area of
options.
18 million people, not 5 million people.
I'm comparing it in this case to putting buses on crowded streets, in which case the Purple Line actually has higher capacity than running buses down University Boulevard or Jones Mill Road.
No, actually it doesn't, because all you have to do is do the same intersection improvements that you're proposing to do for the Purple Line and do them without building the Purple Line, and you won't get the delays caused by the Purple Line. You'll get a lot more improvements to your congestion at those intersections if you use buses instead of light rail.
One of the study options in the environmental impact statement was just doing the intersection improvements and the local road improvements, and it did not perform as well as a combination of the light rail and the intersection improvements. That's a matter of fact. It's right there in the EIS.
Now, I don't know
And that
how
option
you
was
define.
rejected.
I don't know how you define perform as well, because by every single
Congestion levels
measure,
and travel time.
by every single measure, it reduced congestion, and it did so at a lower cost than the rail.
No, it didn't.
Every single bus alternative was more cost effective than every single rail alternative in the EIS.
I hate to break up the dialogue, but back to the audience.
Okay.
In the back of
Thank
the
you.
room. I think there's a microphone. Why don't you come on up?
I get a lot of emails from both sides as well. One that caught my eye is that the Purple Line cost $850 for every income tax filed in the state of Maryland. I don't know if you can validate that number.
Don't think so.
How do I respond to my friends in Somerset County, Carrollton County, that the state of Maryland should fund this project when the economic benefit is all local?
Well, simple. The tax revenue that this creates is a lot more than local. And for about a $500 million investment on the state's front, that's all the state money that's going into this, you're going to get about a $10 billion increase, 9.6 I think is the exact number, in federal, state, and local tax revenue. Four or so billion of that over the 30-year lifespan of this project is state income tax alone. Now, that doesn't count the property tax, which the state also gets. Don't forget, most of the state benefits from the fact that Montgomery County pays for a lot of their services. Montgomery County gets back about 14 cents for every dollar we send to Annapolis in our tax dollars. Somerset and all those other counties are getting more dollars every year from Annapolis than they put in. That difference is only made possible by the success of our economy. And our economy has reached a tipping point where if we don't start investing in transportation infrastructure right now to keep our economy going, to keep employment growing here, which it hasn't for the last several years, we don't reverse that trend, there's going to be no money to support the rest of the state. Montgomery County has been doing that for a very long time. We're called the ATM of Maryland because it is our taxes that actually do fund the city of Baltimore and most of the rest of the state. The rest of the state has an interest in Montgomery County thriving because we are the leading job creation engine. Something like, when I was running the Chamber of Commerce, I knew this stat off the top of my head. I may get it slightly wrong, but something like well over half of all the new jobs created in Maryland in over a period of about a decade were created in the 270 corridor alone. More than half of the new jobs in the entire state. And all that revenue is what's keeping the state afloat to a very large degree, and it is helping the rest of the state. So I could say our success is your success. Montgomery catches a cold, the rest of the state dies of pneumonia.
Question, right there. Microphone's right here if you want. Okay.
Might as well. My name is Louis Leibowitz. I'm a Montgomery County resident. I'll speak loudly because I don't think the
working. On the economic development front, I have some experience in this area. It seems to me that your numbers suggest that the more the cost overruns are, the more the development return will be. If the investment goes up, the return goes up. That can't be true. There's more going on here to me. So if you could point out the evidence that building the Purple Line as opposed to the other alternatives would actually result in development that would not otherwise occur in the Montgomery, Prince George's County area. I'd love to see it. I've read all the studies, and I haven't seen it yet.
Well, we have some people in the audience here who might be able to answer that question even better than I, because they're involved in some of the projects. I noticed a couple of faces out there. But there are specific projects throughout this corridor that can go right through and name. And in fact, they're all listed on that slide I showed you. I don't know if we can go back to that, or whether you just wanted, maybe I can find it and read some of them. But Chevy Chase Lakes is one of them. There is a whole series of projects along the University Boulevard corridor, mixed-use development and revitalization projects in Langley Park. There are a whole series of projects in Bethesda itself, including the air rights project. I mean, I can go right down. There's 31 of them that are happening specifically because the Purple Line is there. And we may have some of the folks involved in those projects right here in this room who could tell you exactly why they're building those projects. And guess what they'll tell you? It's because the Purple Line's happening. So we have on-the-ground evidence.
Right there.
My name is Jerry Garson of Montgomery County. How many additional parking spots will be built on the Red Line and the Purple Line to help the Purple Line increase or maintain its ridership?
The question is, how many new parking spaces will be built along the Red Line and what other lines? And the Purple Line to accommodate the growth in ridership. I don't know the specific answer to that question, Jerry. So I haven't looked at all the Red Line plans. I know about 40% of the Red Line traffic is driving to the metro stations. I don't know what it is on the other lines. Maybe somebody here knows.
Right there. That mic is now working.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Maury Mechanic. I'm on the Village Council for the Village of North Chevy Chase, although I'm speaking in an individual capacity, not official capacity. I wasn't invited to speak here, so I'm not going to give a long speech of all the reasons why I would oppose the Purple Line, but I'm going to throw out, and this is perhaps more for Richard, an alternative to consider. If we take a look at the analysis you provided, all the intersections that would be benefited, where the areas, with one exception, and that's Chevy Chase Lake, and I'll come back to that in a minute, where redevelopment, revitalization may help, these all tend to be between Silver Spring and New Carrollton. And my question would be, would a viable alternative be to build a shorter Purple Line between Silver Spring and New Carrollton, and in addition to saving a lot of money just in terms of mileage, avoiding three significant problems? One, not destroying the Capitol Crescent Trail. Two, avoiding what would be by far and away the most costly and engineeringly challenged aspect of the Purple Line, which is the elevated crossing over Connecticut Avenue, which will include an elevated station at Chevy Chase Lake, and because of the ADA and other requirements, elevation that will probably start at Jones Mill Road and continue halfway into Bethesda. And third and finally, avoiding the problem in Bethesda. And I don't think the air rights building is any solution, because I don't think they're going along with anything, but a problem of where you're coming in at ground level and you're going to have to intersect with a subway that's 75 to 100 feet below ground, where the current proposal is 5 elevators, and we know how well elevators are maintained already in the metro system.
Right.
Let me just come back to Chevy Chase Lake for a minute. Chevy Chase Lake has been authorized for significant development on the assumption that the Purple Line wouldn't be built. If the Purple Line's built, there may be even more. But the notion that somehow the development that is already underway is tied to the Purple Line, I think is either patently false, or people have been less than candid in what they've said to the Planning Commission or to the County Council. So let me throw that out as a less awful alternative than building the Purple Line all the way through. Be interested in your reactions, and obviously, I think you're not going to think it's much better, but maybe it's a little less worse.
Well, I would say nice try, and I understand where you're coming from. But I don't think you're going to find traction for that alternative for a couple of reasons. One is there are actually several other projects. It's not just east of Silver Spring. You've got 4 projects in the Woodside area. You've got not just Chevy Chase Lakes, but there's a couple of projects between there and Bethesda, and you've got 4 or 5 projects in Bethesda. So it's not just east of Silver Spring that you're talking. Secondly, that you get the highest ridership between Bethesda and Silver Spring, and you get the biggest network effects for the benefit, the unique benefit the Purple Line provides of joining the 2 ends of the Red Line, so you don't have to go all the way into DC to get from Rockville to Wheaton. Okay, all of that goes away if you don't build the portion between Bethesda and Silver Spring, and there is a way, and we've been building, light rail and monorail and all kinds of different modes of transit right next to bike paths. There's a great bike path. I used to live in Virginia a long time ago. There's a great bike path along 66. It's right next to a highway, and it's still actually a really nice, enjoyable ride. So there's ways to come to a reasonable accommodation of the needs of the hiking and biking crowd, of which I am one, and still have the light rail purpose for which that right-of-way was purchased in the first place. I always remind people, and I was there when this was all negotiated, the building and construction of that trail was as an interim trail on a right-of-way that was purchased specifically for the purpose of a light rail line. It's not incompatible to have a light rail line with a jogging trail. Jurisdictions have done it all over the place. Getting back to your economic development points too, I don't mean to make it all be just our region. I forgot to mention before, Denver has just had a I think very successful light rail project go in there that generated about over $1 billion in new economic development, and that actually came to fruition there. It was successful, and the overall cost effectiveness of this system, I think, is going to be much better if you do the whole thing rather than truncating the alignment. And I don't think you're going to get support for your alternative in any case.
The latest light rail line in Denver that generated economic development required $300 million in subsidies to the developers to get that economic development. The most recent light rail line opened in Denver carries only 2/3 as many riders as was projected, and it cost twice as much as it was projected to cost.
So they invested $300 million and generated $1 billion.
Wait, Rich, one at a time.
The proponents of light rail everywhere are eternally optimistic about how wonderful it's going to be, and then manage to disappear when it turns out to not ever happen.
Well, if they've invested $300 million and generated $1 billion, that's pretty good for me. And also
No,
in this
that's
region,
not a benefit cost ratio.
I know, but in this region, we have seen success stories, and we've done the analysis of the development that's happened around the metro stations, and it has justified the investment.
Okay, this lady?
Yes, so I have 2 questions, actually, mostly for you, given your presentation. One about the study for Montgomery County. You mentioned the most congested intersections. Another part of that study looks at most congested roadways. And if you go to the table of most congested roadways, you have the top 25. The top 10 are north-south. They are not east-west. So how does, in the broader scope of things, the Purple Line adjust congestion? That's in addition to the fact that most of the riders would be coming from off the buses, as the FEIS itself states.
Well, most of the riders aren't coming off the buses, but
Well, that's according to the...
it's not most.
And then, but then back to the
Substantial number
broader
is
question
not
of reducing congestion, which in turns helps, business development when you have access to your offices in different places. The second question is about shovel-ready. So you say it's a shovel-ready project. In fact, a lot of the design still needs to be finalized. A lot of permits still need to be secured from the Army Corps of Engineers for water quality, and maybe some other permits as well. There are some unanswered questions as the line goes across Rock Creek, as there are impacts on wetlands, and also beyond on some of the other areas of the course. So I'm wondering about the shovel-ready and how confident you can be about that.
Well, I'm less confident now than I was 6 months ago, but I am still confident that if we get a quick decision on whether or not to go forward, this project can be under construction by the end of this year, and that's what I mean by shovel-ready. I mean, it can start construction within the fiscal year that the state legislature is debating right now. And the job creation, the construction jobs, and all that economic development will start to hit our economy during the fiscal year that they're currently debating in Annapolis. So that's what I meant by shovel ready. The congestion levels, whenever you look at a transportation network and you start separating out north-south flows from east-west flows, danger signs go off in my brain, because what you're doing is making some false separations. We have serious limits in east-west capacity in this corridor that are demonstrated and proven. And a lot of times what you see is you'll see people going north-south to get around a bottleneck that's actually east-west. So they'll be going north-south to go a short distance east-west and then go back up. We have that throughout our region because we've got a lot of missing links in our transportation network. And, there are north-south flows that are bigger in sheer volume, but don't be misled by that. That's simply because we have directional flows into and out of the district, which is the core of our region every day. And those flows in our county tend to be north-south. Don't think for a minute that that doesn't also mean there's a defined travel market for east-west trips in this corridor, because there is. And that's been looked at. There's a market for north-south and east-west travel. And any good transportation system is going to get you in any direction, where you want to go.
Okay. This gentleman's been waiting.
Yes, I have a question for both of you. It seems like in Montgomery County that we're so into self-flatulation, in the sense that you brought up the figure of 14 cents, 18 cents, a dollar that we send to Annapolis that we get back in the county, number one. And why are we actually proposing a system that's now 2.5 billion, that's probably going to be a little bit more, when we are not integrating it into the metro system? In other words, we're going to, as Maryland state citizens, going to be responsible for the subsidization and operating costs from here to infinity. And that kind of scares me a little bit, especially with sketchy projection riders and ridership. And the other thing I think that is important to look at is, can't we bring the costs down to look at this proposed link between New Carrollton and Bethesda as something maybe cheaper, simpler, and less expensive to operate, maybe in a BRT system, rather than going with a full hog $3 billion? If they're projecting $2.5 billion just based on what we've been seeing in these projects of late, it's going to be substantially more than that. Then why can't we look at it as something a little bit less expensive on the onset and see how that ridership rolls with the east-west ridership?
I'll jump in first. Again, Paul, I think we've looked at the bus rapid transit options in this corridor. That was part of the draft environmental impact statement. It was one of the options that was dropped. The differences in operating costs apparently weren't as much as people thought, and you had real right-of-way problems with part of that alignment as a BRT system. The ridership did justify an additional investment in this case in light rail, and that's the project that is at the finish line. I worry that if we go back at this late date and start reconsidering the mode choice, which the federal government has already signed off on and already committed $900 million in funding, where you've also got an equal amount that the private sector has stepped up and put on the table. If we go back at this late date and reopen the mode decision, we're probably going to lose all that money, first of all, which is over almost $2 billion. But then that's going to clearly open up the environmental impact statement process again for God knows how many years. And on a project of this magnitude, you're looking at $100 million a year in added cost just simply due to inflation. And I think again and again in this region, we've learned the hard lesson that delay and indecision are the single most expensive transportation policies of all. We learned that with the ICC, which was 20 years behind when it should have been built. Had it been built on time, it wouldn't have been tolled, and we wouldn't have had a lot of the controversy you're having now. We waited 10 years extra on the Wilson Bridge replacement at a cost of over $1 billion to local taxpayers because of the extra 10 years of delay. Are we going to delay the Purple Line and have the same mistake? Because again, the traffic models show, even if you took all the money from the Purple Line and put it into new lanes somewhere, and you put that into the traffic models, guess what? 10 years from now, you're still going to need the Purple Line to meet this very specific purpose and need that joins the existing transit network together and provides for that east-west connectivity that brings our region together. You don't get that with an extra lane somewhere along Jones Mill Road. You don't get that quality of connection by just putting more buses on roads that are too congested for those buses to move. So the Purple Line all of this has been studied, and we are, again, at the finish line and ready to go on this project. Is it a perfect project? I don't think I've ever met one, but it's a very good, cost-effective project. The federal government has found it to be so, and it's ready to go.
Well, let me answer the question first by responding to Rich. None of the alternatives that were considered in the draft EIS considered building new lanes to add to capacity. So we don't know what the cost effectiveness of that was. But every single alternative that was considered that did not involve trains was more cost effective than every single alternative that involved trains. Trains are a huge waste of money because they're so expensive. I want to tell you a quick story about that. As I mentioned in my presentation, in 1980, San Diego opened the nation's first modern light rail line that cost $10 million a mile. In today's dollars with inflation, it's about $17 million a mile. And then the federal government started subsidizing light rail, and costs just exploded. And by 2005, the average costs were $100 million a mile. And so the Bush administration put a rule in place that said you can't, we won't fund any project that costs more than $25 for every hour of transportation benefit gained by that project. And that ruled the Purple Line out because the projection showed it wasn't going to carry enough people to save anybody enough time to keep costs below $25 per hour of time saved. So they hired Parsons Brinkerhoff to come up with these wild, fantastic projections that they were going to get 65,000 riders a day when the Hudson-Bergen line in a much denser, more job-intensive area only carries 43,000 riders a day. And by the way, had also over-projected ridership and under-projected costs.
Can I respond just to the point about over-projections and under-projections?
Well, let me finish the story. So they came just under $25 per hour. And the Obama administration recently rescinded that rule. So now you can spend infinity per hour of time saved, and you aren't responsible. You can spend as much as you want. And so they can now say, okay, well, it's really only going to carry 55,000 or 45,000. It's really going to cost $2.5 billion, not $1.5 billion, because the Obama administration rescinded the rule. Buses are far more cost effective. The buses aren't being considered because nobody's going to make as big a profit building buses, running buses, as they are going to make on a rail line. Yes.
Well, on the ridership projections, again, I want to say a couple things. One is beware of false comparisons. Hudson-Bergen or whatever that place is in New Jersey, I read it in your article before. You can't compare that particular light rail corridor with all of Montgomery County, including Darnestown and Poolsville and places that are quite rural. You've got to compare apples to apples, and a better comparison would be to just look at this corridor, which is not what your statistics do. And if you look at this corridor and the densities in this corridor and what's planned for this corridor, it's more than enough to support light rail. But secondly, on those projections, the Federal Transit Administration, I think Randall actually raises a very valid point about how they used to do projections on ridership, and there used to be, I think, some real problems with over-projecting ridership on projects. But there were some significant changes made, and the Federal Transit Administration did a study very recently where they looked at all of the federal New Starts projects over the last 10 years, everywhere in the United States, and they actually looked at, did the ridership that actually resulted from the project equal, surpass, or underperform what was estimated? And the average for all of the projects over the last 10 years has been that the actual ridership has exceeded the projections. That wasn't always true, but they've improved and I think made some corrections to the way they do the traffic modeling and the ridership modeling. And so I think we can have some confidence in these projections, and I think the numbers are valid and viable.
Okay, we're real close to my bedtime, so we're going to take two more questions over there by the microphone. Hey, Jim, if you flip the switch, there's a slide switch, and if you flip it, it'll give you...
I think most people can probably...
Okay.
My question relates to my understanding is that if the line is built, the revenue that goes into the fare box will not cover the operating cost each year. And my question really is, will the taxpayers of Maryland have to make up that difference
how much is that going to be per year? How much has that been calculated? And by how much might that be going up each year? But this is to both of you. Do we know what the operating cost will be that's not covered by the fare box?
Well, I've seen different estimates on operating costs, and Randall may have different figures than what I've seen. I've seen anything up to $50 million a year for operating costs for the taxpayers. But keep in mind, the taxpayers also benefiting from a $10 billion increase in their property values. They're also benefiting from a $10 billion increase in state revenues. They're also benefiting from 27,000 new jobs, permanent jobs, and 3,000 construction jobs, and billions of dollars of additional wealth and income that's going to be flowing into our pockets as the economy finally starts growing. Well, you're going to be having higher property values, which is in most people's minds a good thing. The property tax you pay is a tiny fraction of what your house is worth in most cases, and I'd frankly rather see my property values go up than down, wouldn't you?
To answer your question, the current projection is that the operating costs are going to be about $58 million a year. That doesn't count maintenance. It doesn't count rehabilitation after the rails wear out in about 25 to 30 years. $58 million a year. Very few light rail lines in the country cover more than about 30% of their operating costs. So you can expect about $40 million of that will have to be covered by Maryland taxpayers. And the idea that it's going to be covered by increases in property taxes, no rail line built in America in the last 40 years has generated an increase in regional taxes. You've gotten local tax increases offset by decreases in property values somewhere else in the same region. No rail line in America built in the last 40 years has generated an increase in taxes. This one is not different.
This one is different because of the market it's in and the level of congestion that's out there and the extreme stress on property values here anyway. And what we've seen from the Metro studies is that when we invested in Metro, it did have that effect on property values because that's this market, and this market is a very tight housing market.
Speaking to fare box for a second, it's my understanding that in Baltimore on the light rail, the fare box there is on the honor system?
Yeah, pretty much. And if you're looking for someone to defend the red line in Baltimore, I think you might have to.
No,
look
this is the
beyond.
current. No, the current
you
light
can't
rail in
equate-
Baltimore. The fare box is the honor system, is my understanding.
Don't look for me to equate the performance of the Baltimore light rail system with anything remotely resembling the Purple Line.
Is this system going to be honor system?
No. Okay. This will actually collect money from people.
Okay.
That will be some.
Last question, right here.
Just checking. Okay, here we are. I'm John Fitzgerald. I have a question that's financial and a question that's environmental, but also has a financial side. Financial question is, do you have an idea of what happened to those $233 million or so that the Office of Legislative Services has identified as questionable charges that they can't explain or understand yet? The environmental question is a cluster of about 3 closely related questions. One is, with the loss of 48 acres of trees and the expected failure to retain runoff, stormwater runoff, which is the thing that we all know brought us the rain tax, on the Purple Line construction sites, as most other construction is required to do. And with the presence, it's in the Water Technical Resources Report attached to the EIS. Okay? And finally, with the fact that that very same area contains 573 hazardous materials sites, 200 of which are thought to contain PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, very highly toxic substances, or something of similar magnitude risk. How are we going to deal with that practically, and how much is it going to cost? And why should we do it? Thanks.
Okay. On the financial question, that's a pretty recent development. I don't know the answer to exactly what's happened. I think people are looking into that as we speak. On the environmental issues, Maryland has stormwater regs that are quite draconian and all-encompassing, and you literally cannot build a major project in this state without taking care of the runoff. So I don't know what piece of the environmental impact statement documentation you're citing. I'll have to go back and look at that. But I know in the state of Maryland, you really can't build anything that has those kind of impacts that you're worried about on runoff, even during the construction phase. And there are more stringent requirements here than, I believe, any other state. So I hope that should take care of your concern.
Well, all I can tell you is that I spent the first 20 years of my career working for environmental groups, fighting large corporations who were seeking government subsidies to do harm to the environment. And then I spent the last 20 years of my career fighting environmental groups who were supporting large corporations who were seeking government subsidies to do harm to the environment. And they think I'm the one who's changed. I don't know why it is that environmental groups let themselves be sucked into projects that are going to increase traffic congestion, that are going to waste energy, that are going to emit more greenhouse gases, that are going to endanger rare species, that are going to do have all kinds of negative environmental impacts, when there are positive environmental alternatives out there that can do a lot more for a lot less money.
Will you please join me in thanking these two gentlemen
Thank you.
for being here tonight and helping educate us. Thank you, Rich, and thank you, Randall. That worked well.
Very much. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this debate as much as I did. And again, give Rich and Randall a great round of applause, and we greatly appreciate their comments. And also, please stay tuned. Please check our website, mdpolicy.org or marylandpolicyforum.org, for our next upcoming Maryland Policy Forum debate, which I believe will either be in the end of May or early June in Baltimore City. Thank you very much, and have a great night.